Professor Naknes, fellow generals and peacekeepers, Lieutenant Colonel Baudon.
That's correct.
Baudon. Forgive my French.
That's okay. My father isn't around anymore, so I cannot.
Ladies and gentlemen, the future leaders of Israel, good afternoon. I would like to thank the members of your faculty for giving me this honor to brief you about UNDOF in the Golan. My presentation will cover the following topics. I shall also discuss a brief look at a day in the life of a peacekeeper as requested by Colonel Baudouin, our humanitarian activities and challenges. As stated earlier, currently the United Nations has 17 missions all over the globe. 4 of them are in the Middle East: UNSO, UNIFIL, UNDOF, and most recently, going through birth pains, UNSMIS. These are manned by 98,917 uniformed personnel, composed of 84,582 soldiers and military observers, and 14,335 policemen, coming from, as was mentioned again earlier, 117 nations on the earth who are engaged in the service of peace. As you all very well know, on October 6, 1973, war erupted in the Middle East. Egyptian and Israeli forces, bless you, engaged each other in the Suez Canal area and the Sinai, while Israeli and Syrian forces engaged each other in the Golan Heights. As the situation in the Golan Heights remained tense and volatile, an agreement on disengagement between Israeli and Syrian forces was signed on 31 May 1974. On the same day, the Security Council adopted Resolution 350, which established the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force, or UNDOF. UNDOF's peacekeeping mission is based on the following preconditions: a mutual agreement of the host nations, Israel and Syria, a resolution from the UN Security Council, which for UNDOF is Security Council Resolution 350, and the commitment of both financial and human resources from contributing nations. Security Council Resolution 350 mandates UNDOF to use its best efforts to maintain the ceasefire between Israel and Syrian forces and to supervise the agreement and protocol with regard to the area of separation and the areas of limitation, which I shall be discussing in a short while. The following is the organizational structure of UNDOF. I wear 2 hats as Force Commander and Head of Mission. Hence, I am responsible for both our military peacekeepers and civilian staff as well. The Chief of Staff is my Deputy Force Commander and is directly responsible for all UNDOF military personnel and operations. The Chief of Mission Support is responsible for all the civilian staff and for all support requirements of the mission and acts as Head of Mission in my absence. Under my command are the Austrian Battalion, composed of the Austrian and Croatian contingents, the Philippine Battalion, the Logistics Battalion, composed of the Indian and Japanese contingents, Force Headquarters Company, composed of Austrians, Croatians, and Filipinos, and Observer Group Golan of Jalkirpia of UNSO, which is under my operational control. UNDOF has a total military strength of 1,047 peacekeepers coming from 6 nations and 143 UN civilian employees coming from 28 nations for a total of 1,190 personnel. The terrain within and around UNDOF's area of responsibility ranges from mountains in the north and wadis in the south. In the north, at 2,814 meters above sea level, Mount Hermon dominates the landscape. The lowest elevation is 200 meters below sea level, located in the vicinity of Lake Tiberias. The different terrain features define the weather and operating conditions. The following pictures will further help you understand the terrain where UNDOF operates in. As I mentioned previously, the most prominent terrain in the north is a mountain range dominated by Mount Hermon. At 2,814 meters above sea level, position Hermon Hotel is one of the highest UN positions worldwide and experiences extreme weather conditions during winter, such as heavy snowfall and 100 km/h winds, which lower the temperature to minus 40 degrees centigrade. That's how tough our Austrian soldiers are. In the southern part of the area of separation are wadis dominated by Wadi Al-Rakad, which is a few meters below sea level. The ceasefire agreement established the 1974 ceasefire line, or the Alpha Line. The agreement also called for the establishment of an area of separation where no military forces are allowed, and is bounded on the east by the Bravo Line, which is the maximum limit Syrian military forces are allowed to advance. Lebanon is on the north and Jordan on the south. The A line and B line are demarcated by painted barrels or drums, which are used as reference points to determine the exact location of both lines. A security fence, the so-called technical fence, represented on the slide by dotted lines, was built by the Israeli Defense Forces with distances ranging from 50 to 300 meters west of the Alpha Line for their own protection and to prevent infiltration into the occupied Golan. This slide gives you an idea what the new reinforced IDF technical fence looks like. The area of separation, or AOS, is 9 kilometers wide at the vicinity of Quneitra and only 200 meters wide at its narrowest near the Jordanian border. It is 75 kilometers long and has a total land area of 235 square kilometers. Are you taking down notes? I'll give this manuscript later, so you will... Yes, so you...
But they love to take notes.
Okay. So you can focus on the... The AOS was created to separate the Israeli Defense Forces. Please continue if you wish to continue. I didn't intend to embarrass you. I just didn't want you to go through this.
Now they're scared of you.
And Syrian Arab Armed Forces. In order to prevent conflict between them, no military forces other than UNDOF peacekeepers are permitted within the area of separation. The Syrian civilian authorities, headed by the governor of Quneitra, and the Syrian police govern and administer the Syrian population within the AOS. UNDOF has two major camps. The headquarters of UNDOF is located in the area of limitation at Camp Fawar, Golan Heights, Syria, while Camp Zuwani, where the Indian and Japanese logistics battalions are based, is located in the occupied Golan. The Austrian battalion is responsible for monitoring and patrolling the northern part of the area of separation, while the Philippine battalion is responsible for the southern part of the area of separation. UNDOF currently maintains 21 positions which are occupied 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 10 outposts which are manned only during specific hours of the day. The other important part of UNDOF's area of responsibility are the areas of limitation, or AOL, which spreads out 25 kilometers from the AOS on both sides, where maximum limits on the number of soldiers, tanks, artillery, and missiles deployed were agreed upon by both sides in 1974 and are constantly monitored by our military observers from ONSO. In these areas of limitation, UNDOF is supported by Observer Group Golan, or OGG. It is an ONSO unit, but it is under my operational control to monitor the AOL. It is composed of 78 UN military observers who are all officers and unarmed. In the AOL, there are 11 permanently manned observation posts maintained by 2 OGG subunits. The first group is OGG Damascus, which is responsible for 5 observation posts on the Syrian side, as indicated, and its headquarters is based in Damascus. And the second group, OGG Tiberias, which is in charge of 6 observation posts on the Israeli-occupied Golan, and its headquarters is based in Tiberias. Before I discuss UNDOF's concept of operations in detail, allow me to briefly explain the normative framework for UN peacekeeping operations that guide all UN peacekeeping missions. The UN Charter, which was signed on June 26, 1945, is the first of these 4 legal references used as a framework for UN peacekeeping operations. The preamble declares, and I quote, "We, the people of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind," unquote. In essence, this affirms humanity's aspiration of ensuring peace, which is one of the main purposes for the founding of the United Nations. The preamble further calls for action and states that, and I quote, "And for these ends, to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security," unquote. Thus, in fulfilling its responsibility, the UN, through the Security Council, adopts a range of measures, including the establishment of United Nations peacekeeping operations. The legal basis for creating peacekeeping operations is found in Chapters 6, 7, and 8 of the Charter. Chapter 6 is the legal basis for peace operations when the international community wants to emphasize the pacific settlement of disputes, but does not need to authorize the use of coercive force through negotiations, inquiry, conciliation, arbitration, and judicial settlement. Chapter 7 authorizes the use of coercive measures, including armed force by the international community, to deal with the threats to peace, breaches of the peace, and acts of aggression. Chapter 8 deals with the involvement of regional arrangements and agencies in the maintenance of international peace and security. The Security Council shall encourage the development of pacific settlement of local disputes through such regional arrangements or by such regional agencies, either on the initiative of the states concerned or by reference from the Security Council. International human rights law is another integral part of the normative framework for UN peacekeeping operations, which are conducted with full respect for human rights and seeks to advance human rights through the implementation of its mandates. UN peacekeeping personnel, whether military, police, or civilian, are expected to act in accordance with the international human rights law, and understand how the implementation of their tasks intersects with human rights. International humanitarian law is the third foundation for the normative framework for peacekeeping operations. Also known as the law of armed conflict, it maintains the fundamental rights of civilians, victims, and non-combatants in armed conflict. It is designed to protect persons who do not participate or are no longer participating in the hostilities. The fourth foundation of the framework are the peacekeeping principles of consent, impartiality, and minimum use of force. UN peacekeeping operations are deployed with the consent of the main parties to the conflict. This requires a commitment by the parties to a political process and their acceptance of a peacekeeping operation mandated to support that process. The consent of the main parties provides a UN peacekeeping operation with the necessary freedom of action, both political and physical, to carry out its mandated tasks. For example, in very simple terms, UNDOF is present in Syria and Israel because both governments have consented to the presence of UNDOF in the Golan. The credibility of all UN peacekeeping operations rests on its impartiality. UN peacekeeping operations implement their mandate without favor or prejudice to any party. Impartiality is crucial to maintaining the consent and cooperation of the main parties, but should not be confused with neutrality or inactivity. United Nations peacekeepers should be impartial in their dealings with the parties to the conflict, but not neutral in the execution of their mandate. United Nations peacekeeping operations use force only in self-defense and as a measure of last resort when other methods of persuasion have been exhausted. Maximum restraint is always to be exercised during operations. The ultimate aim of the use of force is to influence and deter spoilers working against the peace process or seeking to harm civilians, and not to seek their military defeat. The use of force by a UN peacekeeping force is always calibrated in a precise, proportional, and appropriate manner within the principle of minimum use of force necessary to achieve the desired effect while sustaining consent for the mission and its mandate. Hence, with this normative framework in mind, UNDOF fulfills its mandate through a concept of operations of static, mobile, and night operations. These operations are conducted to ensure correct assessment of incidents within the area, to immediately diffuse any conflict of countering claims from the parties involved. Static operations are operations conducted by UNDOF troops manning the different positions, observation posts, and temporary checkpoints. On the other hand, mobile operations are as shown on the slide. Next. UNDOF cannot unilaterally keep the peace in the Golan. We need to engage both sides and make them own the peace and help keep the peace. Hence, coordination and cooperation are key to our concept of operations. We simply cannot do our job unless we effectively coordinate, and not just within our own organization, but with each respective side, and ensuring that both sides are aware of issues that may impact or affect them. It is imperative that we do this because technically Syria and Israel are still at war with each other and do not have diplomatic relations. Therefore, for lack of a better term, we act as a diplomatic bridge in doing so. We must cooperate, negotiate, and attempt to bring a common acceptance of issues and solutions to these issues. Referring back to our normative framework, it is vital that UNDOF remains credible by maintaining complete transparency. To do otherwise would be disastrous. We therefore must constantly liaise and stay in close contact with both sides. I personally meet or speak with senior representatives of both Israel and Syria several times a month, or when needed, and we exchange correspondence on an almost daily basis. In addition to this, my subordinate commanders also engage representatives from both sides at their level. UNDOF's role is to observe, monitor, and report. We cannot intervene. We do not have powers of arrest and detention, and ours is not a police force policing on each side. Policing on each side remains the responsibility of that nation. We depend upon host nation support to operate. Hence, our constant and close contact with each side, and it is important to note that on the respective sides, both Syria and Israel are ultimately responsible for the safety and security of UNDOF personnel. Next. Next muna. Do we still have time to discuss this?
Yes, sure. I mean,
Or would you want me to go to humanitarian activities and challenges?
maybe you should do that. Yeah.
Okay, let's skip the day in the life of a peacekeeper. You want that?
They want
Okay.
to do it.
This is a democracy, right? Sorry, sir.
You're the general. I'm just a civilian.
Where were we?
The day and the night.
Yeah. Lieutenant Colonel Bedouin, in his invitation, asked me to discuss a day in the life of a peacekeeper. While I will attempt to do so, I can only cover it very briefly, as to do so in detail would take a significant period of time, as the ranks of peacekeepers range from that of a private to general officer, not to mention the various distinct roles each fills is a great deal of ground to cover. Suffice it to say that UNDOF personnel work in various roles and occupations. Picture us as a small city, and all of the activities, support, operations, and communications, and so on, are delivered and coordinated internally. In addition, we of course have the soldiers and the battalions patrolling and conducting peacekeeping operations. Regardless, all of them are peacekeepers. And even though they might be a clerk, electrician, infantry soldier, or staff officer, they are all engaged in peacekeeping and may be called to do so at any moment. We are all on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If an incident occurs in the middle of the night, we cannot wait until the light of day. We have to react immediately. In fact, our operations never cease, and UNDOF personnel are constantly observing at all times. Soldiers in the battalion spend a 6-month tour of duty in either the occupied Golan or in Syria. However, commanders and headquarters staff normally serve 12 months as a minimum. I myself have been the force commander for 2.5 years. Many soldiers, particularly those from the Austrian contingent, because of the proximity of their country and their country's policy, serve multiple tours in UNDOF. In addition to this, UNDOF personnel work hard to maintain their physical fitness, to be able to tackle the rigors of long hours, days and weeks, and this they do when they have time off from their primary roles. They are accorded breaks from duty in the form of 48 hours rest and recreation, and they spend this in the mission area, either Israel or Syria, which helps them expand their cultural awareness and make them more effective peacekeepers. So you most likely have seen them visiting Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Eilat, and so on. Next. Lipat mo na. Although UNDOF is primarily a military peacekeeping mission, we have also engaged in humanitarian activities, which we believe helps us bring us closer to the people, wins their hearts and minds, and addresses the various needs of the inhabitants within both the Golan and the occupied Golan, as the following slides will graphically illustrate. Under the auspices of the International Committee of the Red Cross, UNDOF assists in special crossings of the ceasefire line, such as the pilgrims' crossings of Syrian Druze who live in the occupied Golan and cross over to Syria for their pilgrimages and to visit their relatives, which take several days. We also assist special crossings of Syrian Druze students living in the occupied Golan and studying in Damascus, Syria. In fact, today, we had a student crossing and several humanitarian crossings. Every now and then, we also assist in Syrian bride crossings. Very romantic. UNDOF also assists apple crossings. Last year, approximately 12,000 tons of apples were brought from the Alpha side to the Bravo side. This began in 2004 when Druze apple farmers from the Alpha side were allowed to sell their apples to the Syrian government, who in turn sold it in the local market. UNDOF also provides emergency medical assistance to local inhabitants. On the average, we treat 300 people a year in Camp Fuar and one of our southern positions. UNDOF has since its beginnings continued to clear the area from mines in and around its positions and patrol paths. This makes the area safer for both soldiers and inhabitants. Let me go quickly to the challenges. This is my third
This is your third warning.
warning.
You know, on the next one, I'm going to pull out a red card and you're out. Watch it. Yeah.
Being UNDOF does not come without challenges. Many of them, I'm sure, you can appreciate based on what I've already said. Human factor, as was mentioned by the two other generals earlier, is a major challenge. People are indeed fallible. They make mistakes, they get tired, they miss their families and loved ones, they react to stress differently. All of these things are carefully monitored to ensure our peacekeepers are working at maximum capacity. This human challenge is significant as it is also the hardest to gauge. Next. For 38 years, about 56,000 peacekeepers assigned in a minimal budget of $50 million a year, UNDOF has been a relatively successful mission. However, it too has its challenges. There has been a rapid increase in the population in the area of separation. Hence, UNDOF has had to engage them to make them understand its mandate and has created a construction line to prevent any further building of structures closer than 100 meters from the Alpha line. Next. Another challenge is right from the start, both Syria and Israel did not enter into a status of forces agreement with UNDOF, which defines the legal aspects of the mission and its military forces with the government and citizens of the host country. Because of this, the 1946 Convention on Privileges and Immunities is used as a legal basis for UNDOF. However, the dilemma is that this 1946 Convention does not cover or include our military contingents. Obviously, the unrest in Syria over the past 15 months has brought new challenges. It all started in the town of Daraa on March 15, 2011, which, as you all can see on the map, is located only a few kilometers southeast of the area of responsibility of UNDOF. These protests and civil unrests have now spread into the southern and central part of the area of limitation and has resulted in restrictions of movement of our patrols in some areas due to Syrian military operations. Furthermore, freedom of movement for leisure welfare has also become restricted outside UNDOF's area of operations. Last year, we had on the 15th of May, 2011, Nakba Day was one of the most critical incidents and serious breaches of the ceasefire agreement since 1974. Demonstrators numbering 4,000 consolidated at the Syrian Druze village of Ain al-Tina, or more popularly called the family shouting place in Syria, and hundreds crossed the truce line, the minefields, and then tore down the technical fence and entered the town of Mad al-Shams. By end of day, there were 3 Palestinian civilian casualties and 40 injured, and several injuries also on IDF soldiers. The situation only stabilized after the successful negotiation UNDOF made with the protesters through the governor of Conaitra and the division commander of the IDF, wherein we acted as a credible and impartial bridge between the IDF and the Syrian authorities. Subsequent to this was NAKSA Day. Yes. Let me, one more minute. Skip mo na. This brings us to the question posed by this colloquium. Do peacekeepers really keep the peace? Is the UN an effective peacekeeping force? UNDOF being my first and only UN assignment, and so with the Middle East, and after facing knock by NAKSA last year, and the current challenges we face in Syria, and after 38 years of successfully keeping the peace in the Golan, I believe the answer is yes. Last paragraph. Finally, it is for this reason that I often refer to our peacekeepers as warrior peacekeepers. Peacekeeping is a very tough and challenging job. There is no room for mediocrity in peacekeeping. Peacekeepers must possess the passion, discipline, dedication, professionalism, and determination of a warrior in order to effectively implement the mandate of his mission. Peacekeepers must redirect their war-fighting ethos from fighting wars to keeping and winning peace. I expect nothing less from my warrior peacekeepers, and they are all worthy of the utmost respect. Thank you and toda raba.